It's the Kyle Hyman Show on Redeemer Radio.
This is Kyle Hyman, and here to talk about his book, Catholic Republic, Why America Will Perish Without Rome, is Timothy Gordon. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. Great to be here.
I wish I had a digital version of this so I could do a search for how many times you say America is wired Catholic, labeled Protestant, and currently functioning as secular. Kind of a common theme throughout the book. What do you mean by America is wired Catholic?
Yeah, the wiring, metaphorically, is nothing but the ideas which went into the American founding in the 1770s and the framing of the Constitution in the 1780s. They're 100% Catholic ideas. Not only are they Catholic ideas, but they're actually ideas which are anathema or impossible from a Protestant or a Reformation or an Enlightenment point of view. And we're always hearing, of course, that it's a Protestant nation, which of course makes sense because the people were, right, which is why it was labeled Protestant. And a lot of the sort of false copies of the ideas were Enlightenment. That's why it's currently functioning secular. But the wiring itself is all Catholic ideas.
Can you explain some of those Catholic ideas and where they came from? How did these Protestant men get all of these Catholic ideas in the first place?
Yeah, sure. The ideas that really go into the country are the ideas which constitute, they're sort of the benefits of the natural law. We talk about natural law in this country. We talk about it even from a Protestant point of view. It's really impossible therefrom. But so some of these goodies that come directly from the natural law will be recognizable things like natural rights, which are sort of the point and the purpose of the Declaration of Independence, subsidiarity or local rule, which is really the point, the purpose of the Constitution, virtue ethics, all throughout the early 1780s when they're making the Constitution and finishing up the War of Independence. The founders were saying one repeated thing: no matter how good the Constitution is, it'll go nowhere without virtue in the people. So virtue ethics, specifically Aristotelian Thomist ethics, these are the thing. Proper church-state relations come only from a proper understanding of human beings. Science and technology sector, you have to have a proper understanding of technology, and then a proper understanding of the family, which grounds not only the economy, but it grounds what we mean when we say individualism. There's bad individualism and there's good individualism. Good individualism comes from a proper understanding of the family. All of these things, as written about by the founders and framers, are uniquely Catholic, and you can't get them from, on the one hand, a Protestant point of view, really the progenitors of what we call the religious right in America. Well, on the other hand, an Enlightenment point of view, the progenitors of what we call the secular left. We alone do them, and we're the ones that can explain them.
So where did the Protestant founders get these? Was it from reading Catholic thinkers, or was it just because, like you mentioned, this is a lot of has to do with natural law and things like that, and so it was just kind of natural to take some of these things from Catholicism, even though they didn't realize they were doing it?
It's a good question, and I think it's a combination of both. Mostly, it was a kind of muddled pedigree that was like a badly footnoted work, like an ineffective citation. You only cite to a secondary source. The American founders, for instance, were calling themselves neo-Whigs because they were reading John Locke, who was a Whig in England in the previous century. Most Americans even have heard of John Locke. And other Whigs like Algernon Sidney. Well, John Locke and Algernon Sidney, who are Protestants, English Protestants, had been reading guys from the previous century that were also natural law thinkers from Northern Europe, guys like Hugo Grotius and Samuel von Pufendorf. It sounds a little bit like a clown college or something. And Grotius and Pufendorf had been reading directly Thomas Aquinas and the early Jesuits and just said, look, we have to take these ideas. Grotius and Pufendorf were Protestants. We can't get natural law ideas about good government from within, limited government regimes in what we call the Republican form of government without reading the early Jesuits was who it was. It was like Bellarmine, and the other thinkers from the school of Salamanca, they were all Thomists. They'd been reading Thomas Aquinas. But yeah, to some extent, it probably was just natural law is available to everyone, not only Catholics, but Roman Catholicism is the only religion that props it up and shows how natural law works within its scripture and its magisterial teachings. So that's what makes it uniquely Catholic, even as it's universal. And to some extent, that's true. Yeah, this other Whig thinker I was telling you about, whose name was Algernon Sidney, he was even accused during his lifetime of ripping off Robert Bellarmine. And I found this, and it wasn't surprising me at all. I'd already been writing the book, and I was like, I knew he was just from reading the two philosophies, but there's actually an accusation during his lifetime of, look, you're ripping this guy off, and he had to defend himself against it.
We're talking with Timothy Gordon, author of Catholic Republic, Why America Will Perish Without Rome. And whenever we look at your three precepts here, America's wired Catholic, labeled Protestant, currently function as secular, I think we can see degradation over time, but do we also see like kind of a telephone game here where by the time they get to the document that the message has been diluted in a way? Or do you think that the original documents, the founding of the country, they were solid? It's the implementation of them that's the problem.
That's another great question. And all the interviews I've done in support of the book, I've never actually had someone say, is it the telephone game, which is a really apt analogy. No, then seriously, that's good.
Yeah.
Again, it's a little bit of both. One, there's a bit of a half-life in terms of what Pope Leo XIII called Americanist ideas that spiked in terms of degradation in the middle 1940s in this country, about after World War II, where really certain parties in American life had intentionally accelerated the decay within the truly American ideas, even reversing them, like the meaning of the First Amendment. You know, they essentially, in 1947, in a Supreme Court case, essentially reversed the meaning of the First Amendment, you know, which was a protection of religion against government. They reversed it. Now a protection of government against religion. They did it in a case called Everson versus Board of Education. And there's interesting non-trivial details in the Supreme Court in the 40s and 50s that showing the agenda that we probably don't have time for. They're in the 40s, 7 of 9 of the Supreme Court justices were Freemasons. In the 50s, 8 of 9 were, and this was their explicit goal, was to reverse the meaning of the First Amendment, church and state and all that. So that speaks to the latter half of your question. The former half, the telephone game, that's also plainly evident when you look to the history of these ideas. I mean, the latter half would be that the documents themselves were pretty darn good, 80-20, or even better than that, 90-10. They were pretty darn good, and then suffered some degradation over time. The other half would be focusing on, at some level, because you had a bunch of Protestant Whigs reading Catholic philosophy, basically siphoning off the most important stuff, but certain ideas just couldn't be taken without some sort of full footnote, a full admission of sourcing. They were left off or either just not perfectly understood. So yes, that would be the close, apt analogy, invoking the telephone game for you. But it is a combination of both, like what you asked before.
So then, kind of a trajectory that we are on, your subtitle proposes that America will perish without Rome. Do you really believe that we can't do this without implementing more Catholicism into our government?
Well, it's not so much that more canonical Roman Catholicism needs to be imported into the legislative or regulative state in America. It's not that. Mm-hmm. It's what my argument ends up being. Most importantly, if America was founded on the Catholic intellectual tradition, if I'm right about that, which I'm quite confident that I am, very, very confident. I'm a scholar at heart, and I wouldn't make this big claim, even though it's sweeping, unless it were well premised. Then sourcing is what matters. See, I think in the introduction, I say in the first chapter also, it matters very much once the ideas start to degrade, that if you want to do some sort of reclamation of what's called conservative principles at the secular level, you have to go back and make sure that you're citing correctly. And that's because of your previous question. The answer to your previous question is, the ideas are especially low fidelity. They're not hi-fi ideas in the first place, but we have to restore whatever potency is possible at this stage in the game. And you can only do that by getting the full details. And we started out, in the early 1800s, sort of on a lo-fi version of the idea of subsidiarity. Let's go read the full Catholic conception of subsidiarity. That's really the true form. Now we can admit it because it's a do or die. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So citing matters very much. I show how in the book. I'm doing sort of a shoddy job of evidencing it here today, but the citing matters, or else the ideas will remain the cheap copies. And of course, the copies get cheaper through time anyway. So here we are 200 years later. The other aspect is, you always hope for a conversion, right? To get the actual graces from the sacraments. And then the final part of the answer is that those of your listeners who know me from the TNT show with Dr. Taylor Marshall, and we're kind of known for being sharp critics of the Curia, what's happened over the last, not just 6 years, but really the last 50 to 100 years in the church, the infiltration of modernism into the Vatican and all that. So I'm the first person to acknowledge the far-flungness, at least at first, of the claim that, wait, Rome is going to save America? Can't they save themselves first? Protestants say this to me all the time, Protestant friends. And I'm like, no, I got it. Not the personnel, because the Catholic Church, we have tons of our own problems with personnel. I mean, arguably more. I'm talking ideas. It's ideological. And the Roman Catholic Church, even with all the modernists that have stolen into high places in the church, it's a better proof of the veracity, the truth, the weatherproofness of the ideas, that even when we have bad personnel running the ship, the ideas are still basically timeless. They're immutable. They don't, the magisterium of the church still has never been perverted. Those are the ideas that can turn America around, even if arguably America has less personnel problems, fewer personnel problems than the Vatican does. And it's a toss-up. It's a rogues gallery in that case.
So any suggestions on practicals that the average lay Catholic American can do to make a difference?
Well, there's the single cell of society is the family. I talk about this in my 5th chapter. It's really one of the only things that can be implemented kind of right now on the spot. The family is the single cell of a society. All individualism comes from it. And it has to be ordered in a certain way in order for it to work. And in order for men to be men in society, the man has to be the priest of the household. Part of robust leadership is virtue. Right now, I'm sad to say that what we have running around is not wanting to tend to the developing oneself in Aristotelian virtue ethics. Being the priest, prophet, and king of the household means, leadership, unabashed leadership, not watering it down, but also doing the work to be strong, chaste, knowing how to fight, teaching your sons how to fight, be willing to fight, and also to understand what you're actually fighting for, which is the grips of Western civilization itself, among the supernatural stuff.
All right. Well, where can people go to get a copy of the book?
You could find it at, usually in most cases at your local bookstore or at sophiainstitute.com. And it's also on Amazon, though they always beg me to say sophiainstitute.com.
Sure.
There's a big sale going on right now on this book.
Yeah, you can get the paperback or the ebook. Check it out, Catholic Republic, Why America Will Perish Without Rome. Thanks so much, Timothy Gordon, for joining us today, sharing with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks a million. Have a great one.